Greetings, friends. We know the world can get a little crazy and overwhelming sometimes. Even though we can't necessarily change anything, it helps to talk things out. Whether it's politics or the paranormal, cryptids or conspiracies, history or how things are going now. Good conversation is always heartwarming and helps put the world into perspective. It may seem cold out there, but the fire's lit on the old potbelly stove, and we're in the mood to talk. So join us as we gather around the wood stove and have ourselves a fireside chat.
Welcome, folks. Thank you for joining us here at Gather Around the Wood Stove podcast as we remember one of the most momentous days in the history of the world, D-Day.
Absolutely.
And it is, without a doubt, one of the biggest turning points in world history where good triumphed over evil.
Yeah, amen.
And I don't know if any of us in the modern era can really fully understand what happened on those beaches.
Probably not.
And I know for sure in the modern parlance, people do not understand what true evils the Nazis were doing in Europe.
Absolutely not.
And if it had not been for D-Day, they would have spread that evil worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
That the word Nazi has been watered down
Right.
through the years to where everything is a Nazi, but the true National Socialists of 1930s Germany, they were the embodiment of evil.
Absolutely. They did things that they did things we don't even know about to this day, but they did things that are just incomprehensible as far as
Far as incomprehensible, this to think that this, I can't imagine being the soldiers that came across the death camps.
mm-hmm.
That's just horrible to think about. I wouldn't even dare like to witness it, but just the hearing it
Yeah.
is horrible. And I've seen documentaries on that, like Auschwitz and all that. I don't know if you guys have seen any of them, but like from the accounts of some of the guys that was first ones in that camp,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Can't imagine the nightmares that they had after
Mm-hmm.
knowing that this went on and the stuff they seen that me and you probably couldn't comprehend
Right.
unless we were there.
Yeah. And I mean the number of and we always hear about the Jewish people, but there were other people in the death camps as well, and in the concentration camps where they didn't necessarily do as much mass murder. I say as much. That is an important definition because it definitely happened. But it was people of different political parties, uh, homosexuals, various different groups, the Romani.
Anyone that was declared as undesirable
Right,
by the
exactly.
Third Reich.
And one of the things, just talking about the horror of the death camps that popped into my mind, the untold number of deaths, because even with that, we don't actually have an accurate number. Even again, the number that's thrown around just for the Jews is one thing, but it has been shown that it can't be accurate.
I just watched one of the documentary, and I think it was one of the camps, and I think it was in Poland. Wasn't Auschwitz, but one of the other ones that they had, whatever. And they said this. I think at the end of it, they were taking numbers, and they were saying at least known that it was 450,000 people, and it even said that it could be even as high as 600,000.
Mm-hmm. In that single camp.
It is insane. Like I
is.
said, that was one.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't all. Why was there 5 of them that they made one that they?
There were several.
Yeah,
But either way, that was just one camp. That they said 450,000 that they were pretty sure, but it could have been up to 600,000.
Right.
That is insane.
Well, and again, the only numbers that get talked about really are the Jewish people. And if I'm remembering this right, this is off the top of my head, the total count is considered to be 6 million.
It's changed so many times, and it's always going up. It's not going down.
Exactly, and that was my point. At one point, they said it was only 2 million, and now the most recent number I remember is 6. But again, they think it was much more than that, and that is only one group. But what I started to say is, as horrible as those untold number of deaths are, and they were horrible deaths, they weren't quick and easy by any means. There's another factor to the death camps. They would select certain people dependent on their skills that they would keep alive. They had to live with these people that were going into the incinerators, into the gas chambers, and work with them, live with them, and then help to murder them. But they were kept alive because they had a special talent for
But
baking or blacksmithing or something of
that
that nature.
one nice scene on the camp, it'll come to me in a minute, in Poland,
Mhm.
though, they did say, though, that only for so long that they would keep them, the ones that were volunteering.
Mhm.
Then they would execute them because they didn't want them to escape
Right.
and actually be able to give a full account of what was going on.
Exactly. When they
But while we're on that, whatever, I can't remember the German soldier's name, but they do know that one of them actually went out and tried to warn the people in the territory what was going on.
Mhm.
But here's how messed up it was. Like, people didn't want to grasp what was going on inside the camp. They just blew him off. Like, oh, somebody can't be that horrible. Like, he went to the Catholic Church, and they, pretty much laughed it off.
I have my own thoughts on the Catholic Church during World War II, but that'll have to be a different report.
Right, but for
On
the
the
sake of this,
But
that's just crazy.
I want to kind of circle back here, because now that we have some of the description of the evil, I think it's important to give kind of a overview of how we got to where D-Day was necessary and why it was such a pivotal moment. Through the 30s and early 40s, Nazi Germany had just run roughshod over Europe. They'd taken France, Belgium, Poland. They had all of continental Europe, essentially, was either under the Nazi banner or an ally to the Nazis with Italy. Europe was holding on by a thread because Britain had withstood the Battle of Britain.
Mhm.
But the Luftwaffe still controlled the air. The German Navy still controlled big swaths of the ocean. Now, Britain had fought back there too, and the U.S. was sending aid in convoys, but U-boats were destroying shipping. Countless people died to U-boat attacks throughout that time. And then we get to where Europe had to be liberated for there to be any action against Hitler and the Nazis.
Mhm.
And we get to D-Day. And I want to quickly segue into this being a great example for those that don't know the story of it. D-Day is a great example of where, without God's intervention, D-Day might have failed.
Amen. Absolutely.
And the way that took part in this whole overview is the Allies had made a distraction with inflatable tanks, inflatable aircraft, fake bases, to make the Germans think we were coming into the Mediterranean. We were just going to come up from the south and come in. Several of the higher ranking officials saw through that and believed they're coming from somewhere else. But Hitler was firmly in the opinion that we were coming from the south.
Mhm.
And by this point in the war, his brain was mush.
Right.
And he would not listen to anything else. And no one dare cross him, because anybody that crossed him died.
Exactly. You don't cross der Führer.
So God put it on his heart that we were coming from the south.
Mhm.
He would, just like he hardened Pharaoh's heart in Egypt,
Mhm.
he did the same thing here
Right.
and allowed the Allies to have D-Day and to get the foothold that was so desperately needed in continental Europe.
I agree.
And to give anybody who hasn't, that struggles to understand what we're going to be talking about when we're talking about pillboxes, machine bunkers, the landing craft, the coming ashore, even the paratroopers we'll discuss later, I highly recommend going and watch the movie Saving Private Ryan.
Mhm.
It is one of the best on film depictions of D-Day.
Yes.
And to watch that gives a better idea of what we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah. So you might pause, go watch that movie, and then come back.
Listen to us first, then go watch it.
Well,
You'll
Now,
learn.
you want to see the movie first.
Yeah.
If
So they
you
have
don't know,
context.
if you know what a pillbox is, if you know what the fortifications were,
Or even I'll add to that, if we happen to, one of us hadn't to mention it, if you hear of how you used to call them batteries, It was made more or less was a nest or a machine gun, and they did that because the handset was usually shaved in a box, so that's why they. Anyway, I'm just
Yes,
throwing it out.
but yeah, to the movie, even though Hollywood tends to be Hollywood and drop the ball on a lot of things, that particular movie, that opening scene, I don't remember how many minutes of the movie that actually is. It seems a long time when you're watching it, and I don't mean that in a bad way because it's hard to watch, but it actually, and I hate this damn word, it triggered actual veterans who had been at D-Day because it was so lifelike and so much like what they experienced that it gave them flashbacks, nightmares, triggered PTSD, which they called shell shock, things of that nature. So it's the best, maybe the best job Hollywood has ever done of depicting something that actually happened.
Kudos to Spielberg
Yes,
on that
absolutely.
one, and Tom Hanks too. I'll give credit where credit's due. I think he did awesome playing the captain on that. He
Yep.
fit into the role very well for not, having that experience in real life.
Hmm.
I thought he did a great job playing the captain.
Yep.
Was it? I think it's Miller, wasn't it? Captain Miller, who he played.
I don't recall
I
offhand.
think
But
so. Don't all two, but I know there's one of them. I think it was Miller. But anyways,
Well, and I think all the casting in the
yeah,
for him
Yeah.
that movie was spot on.
absolutely. And one thing again, kudos to the people in charge of the movie. They actually had all those actors attend. It was a shortened version, but they actually attended a military boot camp. And they had advisors from the military and from veterans who were there advising the movie and trying to make it as close to reality as they could. Although if they had made it reality, I don't think the movie would have gotten greenlit. I don't think it would have been allowed to be made.
Even if it did, I don't think many people could have sat through it.
I don't think so. And I think it would have, I don't know how they would have rated it back in the 50s, for instance. A movie that had too much violence would be rated X, not because of pornographic things, but because that was just a rating that meant you can't do this.
It was for adults.
Yes.
Only adults could comprehend.
Right,
Even
and-
view.
And back then they had separate theaters that showed movies that were rated that way. You couldn't watch that in a regular theater, and that was long before VHS and DVDs and all this kind of thing. So I don't even know how they would have rated Saving Private Ryan if it was more accurate. But my point is, it would have been so gruesome. I just can't imagine.
So now that we've talked about that, I want to make a different parallel to how D-Day happened.
Mhm.
Because throughout most of our lives, we have seen depictions of, I don't remember the actual name, but line warfare, where
Mhm.
armies lined up across an open field from each other and they advanced in lines and you just hurled lead at each other.
Right. Standing in a formation. Yep.
D-Day was a similar tactical decision,
Hmm.
except for only one line was moving.
Right.
The other line was firmly entrenched
Hmm.
with the pillboxes, with the machine gun nests. They had defenses on the beaches themselves. And when I say a pillbox, it's almost a concrete sarcophagus with a slit out of it, with machine guns pointed at whatever's coming at it.
Right. Exactly. It's and you do the slit, in case people are having trouble envisioning it. It's essentially a window, just a gap in the concrete that's barely bigger than the rifle barrel. So you can see through it, and it's not much bigger than your two eyes as far as height goes.
And it's impressive to me that they're still excavating.
Hmm.
Not necessarily at the beach, but throughout Europe, these
Right.
pillboxes and these bunker fortifications,
Yes.
because they're interconnected. They're not just an isolated thing. They were a really well designed network.
Hmm.
And then on the Allied side, you have boats coming in off the ocean onto an open beach, more or less,
Right.
that offers no cover.
Hmm.
And the ones up in the pillbox did not want you ashore.
Right.
Their instructions were to kill every last one of them,
Mhm.
every last invader. And the primary landing craft was an LCVP called the Higgins boat.
Hmm.
And the Higgins boat was really well suited for landing. It was not rated to stop any kind of munition.
Hmm.
It was open top, So you may get hit before you ever get to shore.
Right.
And you can't see out the front because the front is your landing ramp.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just hearing carnage.
Right.
And I don't know about you guys, but I know me personally, if I'm hearing something, my mind goes to the worst possible outcome.
Absolutely.
So if I'm hearing gunfire and screaming,
Mm-hmm.
I know it's bad. I
Yeah.
know something evil's on that other side waiting for me. And it wasn't one big wave. There were multiple waves that came ashore
Right.
during D-Day.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in the Higgins boats, again, they're great ships,
Mm-hmm.
but they were outclassed by the ocean, by the wall they were running up against,
Right.
and they couldn't all get far enough ashore to get you onto the sand.
Mm-hmm.
Several soldiers drowned because the boat got stuck on a sandbar and had to lower its ramp. And when they stepped out, they stepped into water deeper than they could swim in.
Right.
And they're weighed down by gear. And as you get wet, you sink. But think about shipwrecks back in the day, the
Mhm.
heavy clothing dragging people to the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
But this isn't the deep ocean.
Yeah.
That body's still there.
Yes.
And the men behind them were having to push their comrade out of the way
Mm-hmm. Wade through dead
to
bodies.
try and get to shore.
Right.
And all the bullet wounds, all the bleeding, all the death.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you make it ashore, you're forever changed.
Right.
I can't imagine. Like, and they kind of alluded to it, in that opening scene of the
Mhm.
Saving Private Ryan, whatever them guys marching, whatever. I can't imagine like stepping on something. And you're like, it was one of your comrades
Yeah.
sitting at the bottom of that ocean.
Yep.
I mean,
you had
or
lunch with
besides
guy
that, I can't
yesterday.
imagine the visual of, like, all of a sudden the water turns stained, there's
Mhm.
blood. Like, I just can't
Yep.
imagine what went through their mind besides being shot at. In their mind, one side of it's going, I gotta get to shore, get cover.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of it, like, oh my comrade, see somebody floating, see a name, whatever, like, hey, I remember boot, whatever,
Yeah, that's exactly. It's the guy you had lunch with the day before, the guy you slept next to last night, that kind of thing. And again, this entire time, there's constant machine gun fire. There are mortars exploding. There's aircraft that are strafing the beach with gunfire. I really can't imagine. It had to be like the seventh level of hell.
Yeah.
And I wish I could say these specific names. I was trying to search for it last night and I couldn't find the reference that I was trying to find. It was in a book I read years ago that was lost. There were two commanders of part of one of the invasions. I don't remember which beach. And one of the first or second waves of troops that, like you said, some of them are drowning. Some of them are, they're getting shot before they can get off the boat. There are mortars going off, grenades, all this kind of stuff. And they storm the beach, and essentially they're all killed. And one guy says to his commanding officer that those are the bravest men that have ever lived. And the other guy says, no, they're not. And then 5 minutes later, the next group comes, and they're the ones wading through, swimming past bodies. They're stepping on their dead comrades to storm the beach, and they're stepping over lines of carnage and death to knowing they're going to die or almost certainly die. And he said, no, those are the bravest men you've ever seen.
Well, I think we can all agree that they were all several degrees braver than an
Absolutely.
average citizen, even of the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's something that I don't think carries through generation to generation. It's just the selflessness it took to enlist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a selflessness to enlisting today, to
Right.
serving the country. But in the time of a world war, especially that meat grinder of a world war,
Mm-hmm.
was true selflessness. That
Right.
was true patriotism. And there were all kinds of ways people could help the war effort. And they did.
It didn't matter what you served in.
But
I don't want to, I think people kind of forget that sometimes. You know what I mean? They one over the other. No, it was everybody.
Yeah.
well,
It took the Navy,
the
to
Navy
get
was
the Navy
transport, they
to
got
get
them there.
Yeah, and it took the Air Force. I mean, it took every part of the military. So,
Absolutely.
you know, you could say, well, the guy got it easy at sitting back on the ship.
Mhm.
Well, does he? He's still going through a living hell.
Right.
Watching his comrades, no matter if they were Marines, Army, it didn't matter. Watching his comrades get mowed down. That would be a living hell.
Well, and how many convoys had that man sitting on that naval boat patrolled?
Right.
How many times did he cross the ocean through storms and swarms of U-boats
Right.
and German destroyers and
even
battleships?
You're
Exactly.
transporting, right? The Navy's transporting those guys, right?
Mhm.
So the Navy guys are talking to the guys that are getting ready to go next day, right?
Right.
Like, hey man, when it's over with, you know, let's go get a drink, right? And that guy never comes back. Made a friend, and guess what? He's gone.
Mhm.
That next morning, literally,
Right.
you know, he's gone.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, that's
Well, and there's another difference between the world wars here, where World War One was more of what they call the gentleman's war,
Right.
where there was a degree of honor between the sides. I mean, it's weird to say that about people shooting, killing each other.
Mhm.
There was no gentlemanly combat in World War Two.
No.
Because again, we go back to the Nazi forces. Their leadership was true evil.
Mhm.
They had no regard for human life.
None.
Only theirs. Only their select group.
Exactly.
And it took everybody outside of the Axis powers. It took everybody coming together
Mhm.
to do anything in
Right.
this war.
And to your point, I think I know what you were going to say. Like the efforts of people at home on the home front, and I know Britain was very similar, but we really kind of focus on America because that's where we live. But you had people doing rubber drives, steel drives, aluminum drives, so they were going around and collecting scrap to add to the war effort. You had people who had never worked in particular jobs learning to do those jobs. You had people just coming together and doing anything they could possibly do to help the war effort. And this is a little personal thing of mine. People like to really bash capitalism in the modern world, but the fact that we are a capitalist society is a huge part of what allowed us to do what we did for the war effort. So,
Well, and it wasn't even just the civilians; it was civilian industry.
exactly.
All the shops that could went to making munitions, aircraft, tanks,
Right.
and another part of this whole equation is without the technology, without the means, it wouldn't have mattered how many people.
Exactly.
If we had sent them over there with sticks, we could have sent 3 or 4 countries worth of people, and it wouldn't have made a difference.
Yeah.
And to keep those troops moving, everyone made sacrifices.
Hmm.
Whether at home, whether on the ship, whether I mean, you're talking about Britain for a brief moment of time. The Battle of Britain, every night, Luftwaffe bombers. Every night, sirens. Every night, blackouts.
Yeah. The Blitzkrieg.
But to keep your spirits and country together,
Hmm.
that takes a lot. And there again, I've always been a fan of Winston Churchill because he, in the modern era, he would never have been in power.
Right.
But for the time period and for what he needed to lead that country through, he was the right man for the job.
Absolutely. He was literally born for that, in my opinion.
And FDR on our side,
Hmm.
he was very good at bringing opposing forces together that would have never really worked together. Why did we have Russia help? Why were we working with them? Because he was able to bridge it. If it had been Stalin and Churchill, it would have just been a 3-sided war. There would have been like next to no teamwork.
Exactly.
you know, what's in that realm, you know, what you're talking about, you know, key figures, whatever, you know, even General MacArthur on our side, dude, that dude was smart.
Hmm.
You know, where he moved, like, you know, once they got in, like, you know, their design, you know, moving around in Europe and whatnot, kudos to him.
Absolutely. But
And
yeah. Go ahead, sir.
I want to turn a little bit if you had another point.
Oh yeah, just on the home front side of it, you know, we didn't really mention there was rationing that went on, like sugar rations were famous. There's all sorts of, there's actually some really interesting websites that talk about recipes from World War II because people were so limited on what they could do. There's things like tomato soup cake, which sounds disgusting, But I mean, on the surface, but if you dig into it, you're like, hey, that might actually be pretty good. But like I said, sugar rations were huge and coffee rationing and all this kind of stuff because everything went to the war effort. And they even did, and this is something that we did in the American Civil War too. They did silk drives. Like people would give up their silk clothing so that it could be remade for parachutes. And
which we needed a ton of.
we did. And in the Civil War, it was for hot air balloons because parachutes hadn't been invented yet. I just want to clarify that real quick. But yeah, they did silk drives back then for hot air balloons. But again, this is the level that people are showing up at. They're like, okay, I have, grandma's wedding dress is pure silk and I was saving it for my daughter, but instead I'm going to donate it to the army so they can make a parachute out of it. That kind of thing. You can't get that today. You can't get people to do that.
Yeah.
And then I think Poncho's going to say something when he's done. I have a quick note about the defenses that you mentioned a while ago.
Just
before
while
we
we're
move.
on the thing, like, the everybody pitching in, whatever, the one thing too, it really, once you read, reading or listening to documentaries and stuff, but just the amount of like the women at home,
Mhm.
they left their comfort zone and go work in a factory because they knew they had to take over that position.
Yep.
And kudos, I mean, a lot of people look at it and go, well, that teenager shouldn't have lied on his application. But you know what? I say give kudos to those teenagers for that time, being whether you're 14, 16, 17, to say, you know what? I'm willing to stand up
Right.
for what's right for my country, for the world. And I
Exactly.
always thought that was amazing. You try to get that happen today. Go
Yeah.
to a 14-year-old and say, hey,
Yeah.
you want to sign up?
Well, and you don't only had the super young, but you also had those that would be considered too old for service.
Yes.
Now
Yep.
that they stepped up as well.
Absolutely.
It was a united front of we need to destroy this evil. We need to
Right.
we need to free our European brethren
Mhm.
and save humanity across the world.
Right.
And before you go into defenses, because I think this will tie into this a little bit better
Sure.
than
How
defenses.
about it?
Why was Normandy so important? Why did D-Day need to succeed?
Mm-hmm.
Well, June 6th was when the D-Day invasion occurred. By June 30th, 850,000 men, 148,000 vehicles, and 570,000 tons of supplies went through those beaches.
Mm.
All of the rationing, all of the sacrifices of the people back home and the industries back home wouldn't have been a thing if you couldn't get it on shore. You couldn't get it to the people that needed it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why D-Day needed to happen. That's why we had to win that battle.
Yep.
And let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll come back.
Greetings, podcastians. Lefty here. As of this recording, our little show still does not have any sponsors, but we wanted to take a second to tell you about some friends of ours over at www.geekblendertees.com. As I mentioned in our closing of every episode, they were kind enough to design some merch to go along with our little show, and they have it available on their website. Like us, Geek Blender Tees is a small operation just trying to get going. So if you want to support us and or them, please go check out the website. They have our merchandise and a wide selection of odd, funny, goofy kind of t-shirts that deal with cryptids, puns, science jokes, historical villainy, and all sorts of fun little things. And they're just a good time. So please go on over and check them out. www.geekblendertees.com. Thanks, folks. And welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us, and hope you enjoyed whatever commercial you just listened to. I was getting ready to make a quick note before we took our little break there, and I'm going to add a note to that just really quickly. Madero, you had mentioned about how important the beach of Normandy was and how much had gone through there as far as munitions and troops and supplies and all of that kind of thing. I just thought that maybe it was slightly important to mention that there were multiple landing sites that had been offered up as options, and that everyone had their pros and cons. And one of the reasons that Normandy was chosen, well, a couple of reasons, is that their beaches were relatively flat and therefore easier to sorry, just stumbled over my words. Land on, there was a different word I was going to say. Hopefully, Poncho can edit out my stumble there, but or maybe keep it in anyway. But anyway, it was easier to gain access just because of the flatness. Although they had, after they got past the beaches, the hedgerows that are all over that part of France are famous for causing additional problems. They were like their own line of defense for the Germans, and it was really hard for the Allied troops to fight their way through them. And when you say the word hedgerow, you probably think of like somebody's hedges in their garden that are maybe chest high and nicely trimmed. No, these are just overgrown mini forests of trees and gnarled branches and roots, and I mean it's basically a bulletproof bunker in itself.
Ironically, a good way to get a modern view of what a hedgerow is for somebody in the U.S. is if you watch Clarkson's Farm. Many different times they talk about the hedgerows, and theirs are well manicured hedgerows, so
Right.
they're nice and prim and proper, but they still look like a solid wall of green.
Right, exactly.
So you let that run wild, who knows what you're going to do.
Right, and these were wild, and you're talking 20 foot tall in some places.
Yeah.
Not. I don't know why they're even called hedges, but that's a thing we'll worry about later. It also go ahead.
Again, the ones in the show are ones on farmland, so they're not going to be the same, but it's a good way to see the density of what we're
Right.
talking about.
Okay, I've never seen that, but I'll have to check that out. It was also it had good proximity to the port of Cherbourg, which was a pivotal area for staging, and then it was the shortest sea crossing from England to France. And France, of course, was the place where they had to get in order to take the next step and branch out from there. Like I said, it's sort of a staging area. It's like you can't just take back all the land and property that the Germans had been overtaking for years in a single day. You have to take steps, and they took pick pivotal points, and that was a good pivotal point.
War is not like the game Risk, and Risk where you take a whole big area by just defeating one troop.
Right.
That's not how real war works.
Exactly.
Each inch is paid for in blood and sacrifice.
Absolutely, and there were miles and miles of inches. And then the main note I was going to mention, you had talked a little bit about the fortifications that the Germans had that the Allied troops were up against, and I just kind of I have sort of a breakdown of that. You mentioned pillboxes and machine gun nests and bunkers and all these things. Well, what this is it was called the Atlantic Wall. And it was a massive series of coastal fortifications that the Nazis built between 1942 and 1944. And you're talking 2 years of constant construction. This is not like they did it for a week and took a break and did it for a couple days, on and on and on. And it was specifically designed to defend against the very invasion that we launched on D-Day, because they knew it would have to happen at some point. And they were trying to hold on to occupy Europe. And thankfully, again, with the hand of God, the Atlantic Wall did not do what they wanted it to do. It came close, but it failed in the end. And it was actually, not that this is important, but Adolf Hitler himself, the Fuhrer, ordered it to be done under Fuhrer Directive number 40 on the 23rd of March, 1942. By the time it was completed, the Atlantic Wall stretched about 3,000 miles from the northern tip of Norway to the Franco-Spanish border. It covered much of continental Europe and parts of Scandinavia. Building the Atlantic Wall was one of the largest engineering projects of World War II. The materials used, among other things, included over 17 million meters, which would be about 51 million feet of concrete, and 1.2 million tons of steel. They had more than 500,000 just in France. They had more than 500,000 French laborers, a lot of them forced labor, some drafted, and a few got paid wages, but some of them were outright slaves. And the cost,
in this instance, wages is a very, very subjective term.
Yes, it's a loose term, to be sure. And the cost for the wall as a whole is not even known. but in France, it was 3.7 billion Deutschmarks. And again, that's in 1942. So I just kind of wanted to put a little bit of perspective. I mean, I can't even really envision that much steel and concrete. And again, you're talking 3,000 miles of bunkered positions, thick concrete walls that people can stand behind with boxes and boxes of ammunition, and they can't be touched unless somebody can get within a few feet. And yet they can shoot for days on end. And again, you've got mortars and shit. It's
You ever
just insane.
see any pictures of like inside those bunkers? They showed on like History Channel and whatnot. There's like layers. Like, there's stairs in there going up to it, whatever. Like they had like a house, almost like a housing where they could sleep, and then they layer of stairs, and they're up there on top of the bunker. In that little window, I guess you say, where they can point their gun out.
Exactly.
It was really hard. Even if you had the best shot sniper in the world and gave him a position on the boat, it still would have been a hard shot because the way angle of those windows.
Right.
Like everything that they built on that was by design, for defense. It was crazy, honestly. The amount of
It's kind of amazing they were able to overtake them, honestly.
Well, and to speak about, you're talking about how there was constant construction, constant fortification. They're still excavating bunkers from World War II.
Right.
That all over Europe. So this was the German strategy: is every time they move forward, you fortify.
Right.
Fortify, 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 fortify.
Exactly.
They just so happen to have this border for longer than most of their previous borders. And looking at D-Day, it seems the name Operation Overlord was appropriate because you would need an Overlord strength to get through those fortifications.
Absolutely.
And that's where another aspect of D-Day comes in, where we come into, you have the landing craft, the Higgins boats, bringing troops ashore. But there's still ships offshore waiting. A lot of those were called LSTs, landing ship tanks. And these ships were designed to have your jeeps, your tanks on board. And they would run up and beach themselves, open the front end of the ship, and just spew out weapons and vehicles. But because you're opening the front of a ship and you have a metal hull, it's not ricochet chamber, so you don't want to bring that on the live fire. And they still got shot at, don't get me wrong, even though they beached the day after.
Of course.
But you couldn't bring those ashore during the heat of it.
Right.
So there was another technology that was attempted, and it was the DD tanks, or the duplex drives, also known as the double duck tanks, just in case people want some levity.
Right.
Where multiple different forms of tanks were floated. The British actually, I think, started it, and then we applied the same technology to our Shermans. And much like the Higgins boats, on calm water, this worked great.
Right.
As we've discussed, the English Channel is not calm water.
Correct.
And we were talking about horrific ways for men to die when they would get out of the boats and get submerged and drowned. Another new nightmare for people that aren't aware is we deployed tanks in the ocean to drive ashore on some of the beaches for D-Day. It did not work.
Right.
And they sank. And these men were trapped in these tanks.
Right.
And the way you got out of tanks was you open a hatch. Well, there's now water pressure on that hatch. You're stuck.
Exactly.
And there's no way anybody can save you because there's live fire coming around. They're having to keep themselves warm.
Right.
That's a nightmare. It's not quick.
No.
It's not the slowest death, but it's also not the fastest.
Absolutely not.
And we knew we needed that artillery power. We needed that gun power of the tanks.
Absolutely.
And to not get it on day one greatly increased the number of casualties that were suffered by the Allies. But there was no way around it at this point in time.
Right.
And I believe we also have not yet talked about the night before
No.
the landing. Bombers were supposed to soften the shoreline. They missed. Paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines, both on parachute and in gliders
Hmm.
made of canvas and wood.
Right.
They were scattered. Their drop zones were missed. And if D-Day is running headlong into a wall of death, the paratroopers faced being dropped into the pits of death
Hmm.
because death was all around.
Exactly.
Anybody could sell you out because you never knew who was a Nazi sympathizer,
Hmm.
who was a German official. And that is just as nightmarish to envision being a part of as actually getting out of that Higgins boat onto
Hmm. Well, yeah, because you're falling out. Well, you jumped out of the airplane or the glider, what have you know, or landing in the glider. But the paratroopers specifically, they're while it's a fairly quick descent, it's still slow because the parachute's gliding you down at a reduced rate of speed, so you don't hurt yourself too much.
because if
when
you
land.
just free
That's the
fall,
point.
it's not going to matter.
Right, exactly. The landing's going to be a little hard, but yeah. So and the whole time you have searchlights scanning the sky. If they find you, they can shoot at
Setting duck.
you. Have you're sitting there. They have mortar shells. They have anti-aircraft guns. They have there's just nothing, and you're just essentially waiting. And especially you mentioned the drop zones were missed, and they were. The navigation was wrong on. I don't remember. There was some weather things and various, but you had paratroopers that landed in marshland in swamps and they drowned. You had paratroopers that got caught up in trees, and they break their neck, break both legs, something like that. They're essentially dead. But again, if they're landing in an open area, but they're still too close to the enemy embankments, then yes, it's just again you used the term meat grinder earlier, and that is it's if the meat grinder is going, you're dropping in from above, and you're dropping essentially in slow motion, and that's going to give you a lot of time to think.
Well, and weather played such a role in this entire thing. That's why it's on the 6th.
Right.
I mean, that's weather played havoc with it, and we still were successful.
Hmm.
I can't imagine the the hell that anybody went through in that war. But over on the subject of the paratroopers dropping in, whatever, you're basically a hitting target even though you're moving,
Right.
coming down the sky, right? Can't imagine the guys that sit there. They may not have got hit directly, but the guys that their parachute got hit. Guess what? It's just about as bad as free falling at that point.
Hmm.
Well, it can actually be worse because you can.
Yeah, it
Your
can be.
parachute's now a liability because as you're falling, you could catch if you're in trees, you catch something, all of a sudden it's yanking you real hard. You can
Mhm.
break. You become either shocked or disabled. You may survive, but now you're just easy pickings for becoming a POW
Right.
or just being shot while where you're at.
Right,
and you
right.
have no way to
That's
defend
what I was saying. Like, even if the guy did survive, like the initial landing, he more than likely he got some broken bones.
Mhm.
He ain't gonna move as quick as the other guys that got mobility to run. It's your
Well, and the other thing for the paratroopers is there's layers to the gunfire.
Hmm.
Because when you're in the aircraft or you're in the glider and in the first part of your descent, you're in the flat cannon territory. And you can have airplane strafing too. There's a whole lot of ways to die up there. But as you get lower, the ways to die increase.
Right.
Because you start getting into smaller and smaller caliber range.
Hmm.
So there's more bullets that can come and hit you. Because it don't take a flak round going off to kill somebody if it hits them directly.
Right.
It's designed to explode. That's not its only way of killing.
Right.
So you have the flat guns. Now you've got machine gun fire. Then you can get small arms fire.
Mhm.
And then you're on the ground. And if you break a leg, then you're in knife territory.
Hmm.
And if you're stunned, you can't defend yourself.
Right.
Again, all of these things that could have completely ended D-Day before it ever actually got a chance. But by the grace of God, it
Mhm.
succeeded. By the
Exactly.
grace of God and the grit of men.
Exactly.
well, that takes just about the m- biggest amount of bravery as coming in from the sea
Mhm.
as it would jumping.
Yeah.
Number one, you're up here, you're up above land, just looking down at the
Yeah.
initial drop. Them guys didn't think about it. They had one job, they jumped and they went.
Well, the other aspect of paratrooper that I had forgot to mention earlier is once you do land, if you don't hide your chute,
Mm-hmm.
you're telling the enemy where you and your other battle buddies landed.
Exactly.
So you had to hide things. You had
Mhm.
to you had to try and hide a glider. How do you do that?
Yeah, exactly. So you had to make it through all of those layers of armament, like you said. And then when you finally land and you're quote unquote safe temporarily, you have a job you have to do. You have a bunch of work to try and disguise your landing so that they don't pinpoint. And again, then you're in enemy territory, so you've got landmines and you've got tripwires, and it's unreal to think about.
Well, and it's also you think one of the things the paratroopers had, and again, it's a blessing and a curse. Theirs was at night.
Mm-hmm.
They at least had a shot at stealth. Those boats that went after Normandy Beach, they had no stealth. They had nowhere to hide. You are completely exposed.
Right.
And yet they still went.
Mm-hmm.
They still did their job. And their actions saved the world
Exactly.
in no uncertain terms.
No, and that is not an exaggeration, because if the Reich had been allowed to just go on unchecked, they would have eventually. I mean, some people will argue that they could not have overtaken America, and maybe not. It kind of depends on
What is
how
still,
gradually it was
it
done.
would have been a living hell
It would have
for
been
the
it would have
motherland.
Well, let me-
You're fighting.
Let me just tie this to a technology thing real quick.
been. Mhm.
Because in World War II, the U.S., a lot of people looking back on it now were like, oh, well, the U.S. was untouchable. We were across the sea.
Mhm.
They found U-boats off our coast.
Exactly.
These U-boats were all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the Germans were working on a plane called the America Bomber
Yes.
that could have bombed the U.S. How do we know this? We have that plane, but with jet engines, it's called a B-2 bomber.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to look very far back. Just earlier this year, bombers left the middle of the U.S., flew to the Middle East, conducted a bombing operation, and flew back within a day.
Right.
That's proof positive that that concept can work.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nazis had jet technology.
Right.
The Messerschmitts were a thing.
Mm-hmm.
How far off do we really think they were?
That's exactly my point. That was kind of what I was saying. Eventually the Nazis would have overtaken every country in the world if they were able to. And I think America may have given them more of a fight than some countries, the majority of countries, honestly. I think that's a fair assessment. But yes, because of things like the America bomber, the Messerschmitt, all this stuff, they had a much bigger chance than I think people give them credit for. And again, it also depends on how you go about it and how much over time it's done. You've got propaganda campaigns, all these other things. But the point is, if they had not been stopped, Hitler and his Reich would have kept going, because Europe was not the goal. The world was the goal.
Well, and if D-Day fails, how long does Britain have?
Not very.
Because they were at their wits' end. Now, again, the British people, amazing resilience through the Battle of Britain. But Britain would have eventually fallen. Because if we were thinking of landing actions, the Germans were thinking of landing actions.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about that. And as soon as Britain falls, the U.S. would not be the next target. It'd be Russia round 2.
Mm-hmm.
And Russia may not have the winter to save them this time.
Right.
And Russia would have been getting hit on their two fronts. They would have had Japan and Germany on them.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Japanese were desperate for help because of the Pacific Campaign.
Right.
They weren't doing horribly, but they could see the writing on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So they needed to get everyone else out of the war so Germany could come help them beat us.
Mm-hmm.
If Britain falls and Russia falls, the U.S. is standing alone.
Right.
Okay, I can't say alone because you've got South America and Canada and like Mexico things. But South America and Mexico did not really have military to speak of to
Mm.
contribute.
No, not really.
Also, just start looking up how many Germans escaped to South America. South America was almost conquered anyway
Hmm.
by a losing force.
Right.
And Canada, they didn't have the military might to withstand without the U.S. And I truly believe that if the U.S. had been alone, we would have stood longer, but I believe we would have eventually fallen,
Hmm.
basically due to starvation of resources.
Right.
Not necessarily food starvation, but if you're isolated, you burn through your resources and you have no other option. You have nowhere else to turn for resources, whereas your opponent has the world's resources.
Right.
So D-Day was the pivotal moment of world history.
Hmm.
We could be living in a much different time.
We wouldn't be. I can almost guarantee we would not be able to do this podcast.
Absolutely
if they
not.
had one. I mean,
You could not question the government.
no, I don't think that was. I don't think there's even a way to argue against that because yeah, it was not. People like to think socialism is a good thing, but if you actually lived under Hitler, you would not think so.
And another point to talk about when it comes to how close Germany was to actually pulling this off.
Hmm.
I believe it was Swedish Special Forces. I could be wrong on my Special Forces, but there was a Special Forces raid that stopped heavy water production, or the Germans would have had the A-bomb first.
Hmm.
They were extremely close when that got cut off.
Right.
Everything was by just, to an outside observer, would be luck of the draw or luck of timing.
Hmm.
Again, God knew which side needed to win.
Yes, absolutely.
He knew.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say I think I'm 70% sure you're right about Swedish Special Forces, but
I'm pretty sure it was a Nordic country, but I'm
Yeah.
having trouble, like, in my mind,
yeah,
confirming it on the fly.
I know what you're talking about, and I can't remember to be sure, and I didn't, think to look that up.
There again, looking into each of these operations, each of these things
Hmm.
could be their own episodes by themselves.
Absolutely.
Because
Well,
there's so much there are so many intricacies to these operations.
oh yeah. Well, it's like you mentioned Japan. We were talking about patriotism and the people, fighting to the last and all this kind of thing. Japan took that to a whole new level, the Japanese soldiers, but we'll maybe
But
talk
it wasn't
about
just
that
the
later.
soldiers, though. It was populace, too.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I'm just saying that could be multiple podcasts just on its own. And as far as the world domination goes, I was just going to mention one other thing really quickly. It ties into the thing with. Sorry, I had a bug trying to fly up my nose. Hitler actually despised fascists, yet he paired up with Mussolini, an actual fascist. And the plan was that he would use Mussolini's military essentially as cannon fodder and decimate Italy's military resources so that after he conquered the Allies, he would then take over Italy.
Well, and he knew that Mussolini was weak enough that it wouldn't take much.
Exactly.
Now, again, Mussolini was ruthless,
Hmm.
but
He didn't have the backing.
in the magnitude of world powers, Mussolini was an also-ran.
Hmm.
And Hitler knew that.
Right.
I mean, he was taken out by his own people.
Hmm.
And is he the only one in World War II that was taken out by his own people?
I cannot answer that off the top of my head because I
Because
don't want to be wrong.
I know that Germany, us and Russia, the Allies and Russia took out. Japan, their leaders surrendered. They weren't
Mhm.
killed by their people. So yeah, Mussolini was the only Axis leader, one of the prominent ones,
Right. Sounds
to
right.
be killed by his
that-
own people.
On that note, like if everything would have turned out differently, an outcome, even Japan would have been under Nazi rule. I mean,
That
really
would
do
have been, if we're playing hypotheticals, that would have been an interesting one.
Yes.
Because Japan was quicker on the aircraft carrier front.
Hmm.
And World War II was the highlight that naval combat was dictated by aircraft carriers. And Japan knew that. That's why they actually failed at Pearl Harbor, because they were aiming for the carriers.
Right. And I,
See, you want to talk about godly intervention, that alone intervention.
Hmm.
It just so happened that, most of our carriers left the harbor.
They were on.
They didn't know that. They were on their own. Think about that. How that would have changed if they had.
The
exactly.
closer you look at World War II, the closer you realize that God's hand directed him.
Absolutely. I don't think, I don't think you can say anything else. I mean, I don't think you can say otherwise. And I only mentioned Mussolini and all that because just to sort of cement the fact for people, that it was not Europe or just England that I realize Italy's part of Europe. I'm not saying
It's the boot.
Yeah, the Boot, but Das Boot,
Yeah.
considering from the German. But anyway, I was just saying, it wasn't just England that he was after. He wasn't just Czechoslovakia. It was, he intended to just work his way across the globe.
Well, and look at his early war agreement with Russia
Mhm.
to prove that he didn't view his allies as allies.
Right.
He viewed them as a temporary ceasefire so he could focus somewhere else.
Exactly. It was you just don't bother me while I'm over here doing this.
Right. Don't pay attention to what I'm doing. You just keep living your life over
Right.
there. Trust me, I won't stab you in the back, bro.
Yeah,
almost like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
exactly.
Except for the guy behind the curtain is actually in front of the curtain with a flamethrower and both
Right.
hands going, "Don't look at me."
Right.
I would kill you. Don't look.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry.
but that was not a German accent, but I don't know where my head went. Anyway, to the Japan question, I wonder, that would be an interesting confrontation. I have to assume they would work as quote unquote allies in the beginning if the Axis powers had won the war. I think they would at least pretend to be allies in the beginning, but at some point, yes, it's going to come down to who can win, who can overthrow the other.
And I think that would come down to a determination of who has the footing. Where.
Yes, or just sheer number of troops. All right, so we've not exactly gotten off topic, but we've sort of branched out a little bit. I'm going to bring it back to D-Day specifically. And I just wanted to say something. We've mentioned the airborne operation and the paratroopers and things like that. I have a little bit of specifics on that. The airborne assault that kicked off Operation Overlord was called H-Hour, and I was unable to find out what that stood for. In fact, a couple of different sources said that the reasoning behind that is unknown. So I'm sure it meant something to somebody at some point.
It just didn't get recorded.
It just didn't get recorded. But the units involved in H-Hour included the U.S. 101st Airborne Division and the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, and that's pretty famous. I think everybody's heard about the 82nd. And then among your non-American units, the most famous one were the British 6th Airborne Division of the RAF. The airborne assaults occurred about 3 hours before the main beach landings and the amphibious assaults on the shores. The airborne invasion consisted of more than 20,000 men and 12,000 planes and gliders. And they created a lot of confusion among the German lines, which helped clear out the beaches a little bit. We talked about what a meat grinder it was, but imagine if half the units hadn't been distracted by the air raids that were going on, how much worse it could have been. And there was sort of a compromise in choosing where and when to land, because landing at a dead low tide would avoid most of the beach obstacles that threatened landing. They had things in the water to prevent landing. They had mines. They had all these things that threatened the landing craft, but that would have exposed the Allied troops to a long advance over open beaches. So they would have been 3 times as long under the machine gun and mortar fire and all of these kind of things. Whereas landing at high tide would have played to the strength of the German defenses. It would have been that much harder for them to even reach the beach.
Because they had designed their defenses they're going to be wanting to shorten their advance on the beach, so we need to make it where this segment up here is the most heavily fortified.
Right, exactly. So it was sort of a toss-up and then that would have really crippled the Higgins boats that you were talking about and made it almost impossible for them to even get there. But then if they had made it, they would have had a lot less beach to cover. So it essentially came down to a coin toss. And the compromise was that they tried to land on a rising tide so that it was neither too high or too low, but still on its way up. But again, because of just right. However, the weather and various things, they were actually delayed. So the tide was higher, which is part of what led to, like we were talking about, the guys getting, not being able to even reach the
Right.
beach and drowning and these kind of things.
Yeah, because everybody thinks of these beaches as like a smooth, gradual ascent,
Mm-hmm.
but there's natural undulations. You're going to have sandbars and stuff that
Right.
are where your boat's going to catch, and then you're going to have a deep well on the other side of it
Mhm.
still. And you can't wait for the tide to pick you up because you're just sitting duck in
Right.
in those boats because you're close enough to shore at that point. And the machine gun nests are right down on the open top of the boat.
Right.
So
Exactly. And then again, you have defenses in place to try and prevent you from getting there in the first place that work with the natural barriers. And I'm going to mention a couple of those. I can't think of the word I just said. I apologize, but the defenses,
There
the
you go.
deterrents is what I was trying to say. I apologize, folks. My brain. Anyway, I have a bit of a first person account, and I'm going to read part of it to you. It would take a little too long to read the entire thing, but I found it very interesting since we were really talking about the soldiers that were on these beaches. Now, this guy happened to be an engineer specialist, so he didn't have as much direct fighting, but he was still there. Uh, his name was Jay Rencher. He was born in Snowflake, Arizona in 1924 and was assigned to the Army's 1st Engineer Special Brigade, 531st Amphibious Regiment. He was still just 19 on D-Day when he was tasked with clearing obstacles to facilitate the amphibious landing at Utah Beach, and more importantly, he had to disarm explosive devices. Before the famous Higgins boats that we've mentioned multiple times could even reach the landing zone in the Tarre Green sector of the beach, Rencher and many others had to swim in the dark and attach explosives to a series of 2-inch underwater steel cables that the Germans had strung to prevent an amphibious landing. He was able to actually see German sentries on the beach when the explosives detonated and severed the cables. And following this are some of his own words about the D-Day invasion. By the time of the invasion, we knew exactly where we were supposed to go and what we had to do, said Rencher. Our job was to detect and disarm all the different types of mines that the Germans had in the water and on the landing beaches. They had around 20 different types. There were half a dozen mines just for personnel, as well as tank mines, water mines. And some were just concrete with dynamite inside. Some came up out of the ground 6 feet when you set them off and exploded right in your face. Rencher was part of a 3-man squad. The other 2 guys were Otis Ham and Dan Schellenberg. And Ham was a veteran who had made all 3 previous invasions, knew how to detect and disarm everything, and made sure that the other 2 were trained to be just as professional as he was. Rencher went on to say the task of disarming required good ears, steady hands, and more than a little luck. For each mine, we had to find the teeny tiny detonator. We worked as a team. One of us had the mine detector, which was a disc about 1 foot across with a handle and a meter with a dial on it. There were earphones that would hum, and the dial would tell you when it had detected metal. We had to detect each mine, we had to disarm them, and often the mines themselves were booby-trapped. General Rommel had ordered 50 million mines for the beaches at Normandy, and at the time of the invasion, he had over 20 million of them installed. So just think about that for a minute. We talked a little bit earlier. He mentions in this account that the best day for attack would have been June 5th, but the weather was too rough. But June 5th and 6th had the lowest tide for the next 6 months, which is why they decided to go on the 6th as opposed to waiting. Of course, the 6th not quite as ideal, but they had to do it. He says that they were loaded onto 10 of the LCT boats that Madero mentioned earlier on the night of June 5th, and they waited for the sea to calm. He said we left about 6 p.m. and the 531st had to land at 5 to clear the beaches. The waves were about 5 feet high and we got very seasick. In a way, being seasick helped us because we couldn't stand to stay on the landing craft any longer. About a half mile off the beach, they loaded us into 30-man landing craft for the final approach. Utah Beach was eerily quiet. I had 60 pounds of explosives in my pack, both TNT and composition explosives, Rincher said. The good thing about the TNT was that a bullet could pass right through it and it wouldn't blow up. You had to have a blasting cap to detonate it. But I also had to carry those. If a bullet hit one of the blasting caps, it would have detonated the 60 pounds of TNT, and I would have been completely vaporized. And those were the words of Jay Rincher. And I'm going to turn it back over to Madero now. Or no, Poncho, rather. Sorry. That's
Thank
my
you.
bad, folks. Ignore me.
That's okay. It happens. Anyway, just gonna keep it short and sweet, and I know you're probably get more into it. I just wanted to personally, give a thank you. Even I know most of our World War II heroes have already passed, unfortunately.
Yes.
But to their families, and may still have people still survive. Down. I want to say, thank you. I wish I could go back in time and shake every one of their hands. Say, man, you guys were definitely, without a doubt, they're one of the greatest generations
Mm-hmm.
ever.
Absolutely.
Especially with the bravery, courage, and the sacrifice, that you were willing to make sure that evil didn't persist in this world. And I just, not only people here in America, but, people across the pond, that were allies of ours, Thank you to your family members, too, It took a big effort. And that's basically all I wanted to say was, thank you to your family members for that ultimate sacrifice. Some of them never even made it home from that beach or wherever it was at. And I'm sorry, to your family that never got to hear stories or what it was like.
Right.
But just let you know that at least me personally, I still think about that time, even though it's years later. Because like you both had said, think of a world where had it went the other way.
Right.
Like you said, we probably wouldn't have be able to have this discussion around. It'd be no, you ain't doing that. But anyways, that's all I got, Mr. Madero.
I'd like to say a thank you to all of the people that have listened to this podcast and have been with us on this discussion. And I want to challenge people a little bit. You're right. The majority of the World War II veterans have passed.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in a cemetery, whether you're going to a family grave or you're I know there's several people that will walk in cemeteries just to get exercise. When you see those plaques of those veterans, say a silent prayer.
Absolutely.
Thank them. Thank their effort. Thank their time here. And if you meet a surviving veteran of any war, thank them.
Mm-hmm.
They put their life on hold and they put their life on the line so that we can live free.
Right.
And the men at D-Day, several of them made the ultimate sacrifice so not just the U.S., but the world could be free.
Absolutely.
And with that, I think we will end this recording. Thank you very much. Like and subscribe, and we will catch you next time we gather around the wood stove.
Thank you, folks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Later.
Gather Around the Wood Stove is an independent podcast, meaning that the three of us do everything. If you would like to help us grow, please follow, rate, like, subscribe, and share us with a friend. If you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss, leave a comment on our social media, drop us a DM, or email us at gatheraroundthewoodstove@gmail.com. That's gather, ROUND, thewoodstove@gmail.com.